Welcome, everybody. I'm very happy to see so many faces to our first Environment Brain Bites after the summer break and our first Brain Bites in English. Maybe we should always have it in English, and then there are more people coming. It's my pleasure to welcome you today and to introduce to you Dr. Somidh Saha. He's at the Institute of Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis at KIT. Somidh did his PhD in Freiburg back in 2012. He joined KIT in 2017. And his research interests are related to forests, mainly, and trees, such as forest transformation, forest ecology, but also silviculture, I saw in the internet, and often with social ecological aspects. This is about what you're doing. Today, Somidh is giving us insights in part of his research and explains why we should preserve large city trees in Karlsruhe.
Yeah, thank you very much. And also thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk in Brain Bites. I think this is very simple question and everybody knows the answer. Yeah, that we need to have large trees in the city. They have so much positive benefits and so on. But you know, we humans, when we don't quantify things and make a value out of it, perhaps we don't take care or we take benefits as granted. So that was somehow the motivation to really know why we need the large trees in the city, what are the benefits, and to really kind of quantify this. So I think you all know that this part of Germany is becoming warmer and warmer and drier, and also we see more heat waves, more extreme rainfall events, and at the same time, southwest Germany or Rhine Valley is becoming much more urbanized. The amount of impervious surface is increasing, so we have sort of double stress of global change in our region. So I really like this photo from Markus Breik from KIT. It's a very beautiful photo because it puts our castle inside and then Bundesgerichtshof, and you beautifully see the gradient of all kind of space where you can find trees. So when I say trees, that's the interest of our presentation today. I am talking about trees which are outside the forest, or I would say solitary trees. So in most of the case, street trees, trees in park, or plaza or park, or also in the cemetery. We do work also on the forest trees from the gradient from city to peri-urban area. But today we focus mostly on the city trees, which are growing solitary. Another beautiful aspect of this feature is that this is very typical cultural landscape of Germany, where you see that a relatively short geographical scale, you have a very wide range of habitat from street to park or from street trees to the forest trees. So when you think about climate change impact, that's super important that a same species will not react in the same way definitely when they are on the Kaiserstraße or other part compared to the forest. Yes. So I love this beautiful table, this very classical way to classify different kind of, space of utilizations in the city. So I think if you look about different kind of habitat or built up area and transportation area, I am talking about today the trees which you can find near the street or inside the park area or garden, which is kind of open, public open space. So this is a kind of definition of, city use by Leibniz Institute, and I really like this to just to give you some sort of frame that the management goal, the safety, and the utility, so tree as a utility, that has to be considered also. Although I will talk a lot about the benefits of trees, but you also have to see about the risk and safety issue, which I will touch very later. So if you think about the solitary trees in Karlsruhe, so we have colleague Mario here from Gartenbauamt, we work together. We got this data from Mario. So Gartenbauamt of city of Karlsruhe has 136,000 trees. What that means that trees which are grown on the area owned by city. However, we had a student project a few years ago, and we used remote sensing to count individual trees in the city, irrespective of their ownership. And you can see there are nearly 400,000 trees, yeah? And only 136,000 trees are kind of owned by Gartenbauern. So the rests are owned by private people or, state of Baden-Württemberg. For example, trees in Campus South, they are owned by state of Baden-Württemberg, not by city of Karlsruhe. So Campus North and North in another city, but Campus South has another around 5,000 trees. And Schloss Park is, for example, owned by also state of Baden-Württemberg. So, but the Gartenbaum trees are regularly monitored. They have a permanent number on them. So it means the rest of the trees, we don't have always very lot of information about their location and which species they are and size, so on. So the aim of the talk is large trees as a habitat, a biodiversity function of the tree, so habitat function of the tree and human well-being. It's very, very important issue when we are talking about trees in the city, regulation of climate by city trees. Then I will kind of sum up the take-home message and some provocative thoughts, perhaps. So I'd like to introduce the concept of habitat trees. This concept comes from the forest, particularly from the old growth forest, where forests are very old. So a habitat tree is a tree when you have a lot of so-called microhabitat on them. And these kind of microhabitats can be epiphytic or epixylic structures, cavities, exudates, fruiting bodies, excrescence, deodude, injuries, and they can be classified in 7 big forms, 15 groups, and 47 types. I'm not going detail on that, but I just want to make sure that we try to identify these 47 types on a tree and try to quantify, based on that frequency and density, how much provision a tree can provide, potentially assuming that having more microhabitat will also fetch more animals or birds or plants. So one of our key finding was that tree-related microhabitats, that's the word now I will use very frequently. If you have more large trees, of course there you have more biodiversity, because there is a threefold increase in a 40 centimeter diameter oak tree in comparison to a 20 centimeter diameter oak tree in terms of microhabitat provision. So microhabitat richness and frequency. So when you have more habitat provision, of course there can be more biodiversity. So key message here is that you need to, if you have increase in the size, definitely there is increase in supporting ecosystem service or provision. There's just some nice example of different type of habitat or cavities. You can find whole dendrothelms, where you can also have a small pond-like structure, which is not, of course, permanent. Trunk cavity, bryophytic moss, nest of birds, and woodpecker holes. So these are just very, very few examples that we have found here. So it's also part of work from Zoe, for example. She's here today. Thank you, Zoe. And yeah, so that's the main message. The more bigger the tree, you have more microhabitat. We are also interested to know, there's lots of discussion in Karlsruhe all over the world, not only in Karlsruhe, whether we should have trees from other continent, other environment, exotic trees and native trees, their impact on biodiversity and so on. Many a times those discussions are not based on evidence rather than more assumptions. So we try to see that if we take a native oak, pedunculate oak, and exotic red oak, and try to hypothesize that red oak will have less microhabitat provision, perhaps more better health condition, and other way around for native oak. And we focused on bats because we had a good cooperation with University Koblenz-Landau, and we got a sensor which can actually measure the frequencies from the bat. And we selected 180 randomly selected trees all over Karlsruhe from the street and park, comparing two habitat. What we have found is that there are 9 species of bat in Karlsruhe that we could at least record, and coming from 3 genera, Pipistrellus, Plecotus, and Nyctilus. And the fantastic part is that within the main genera, there are different types of habit or or kind of trait to eat insects. Yeah, so the most of the bats in Europe, or all bats in Europe, 46 species of bats are there in Europe. All they eat insects. We don't have frugivorous bat that starts from Egypt or North Africa. So Pipistrellus bats, which are most common bats in Karlsruhe, they don't differentiate between native and non-native oak. Okay, and because they fly and catch the insects, so they are kind of hunter on the air. On the other hand, brown-eared bats, they prefer more native oaks, they prefer more park trees when the oaks are located in the park, and they prefer this kind of crazy structure like forks-built sun skull damage, woodpecker holes. These are those microhabitats I talked to you, 46 types and 3 of those types. And that was somehow correlated because these bats are kind of landing on the tree and looking for insects, and those insects can be mostly found on those structure. That's the main reason. And then we have nocturnal bats. They also don't differentiate between trees and nor habitats. So main message here is that nativeness does matter when it comes to the biodiversity of local animals, but not for perhaps all. Some are more generalist, some are more specialist. For Plecotus bats, at least it matter. Then we have a very interesting project about the cemeteries. So we take 3 cemeteries from Karlsruhe, including Rupur, Durlach, and the Hauptfriedhof, or the main cemetery. We are interested to know how the microhabitat provisions were for the cemetery. So we selected kind of Lisa, so our student, she selected 40 large trees per species, 5 species for Norway maple, hornbeam, beech trees, and platanus trees, and oak trees. And what can I say is that was so fascinating in this project with Lisa, because the cemetery trees, they have a very unique way of arboriculture, because they are managed in a way that kind of heal a human who is grieving and visiting a loved one in the grave. And they have a very specific way of maintaining the crown. And one of the most oldest trees, which was born before Karlsruhe was created, that's how I understood, is a very large oak trees. And the cemetery trees are kind of microhabitat paradise. They have so much types of microhabitat. They have so many birds and so many animals, which we still need to quantify. Well, this crazy mathematical graph will only tell you a very simple thing, that this Q row means Quercus robur, FASY means Fagus sylvatica, or beech trees, Q row means oak tree, SEPL means Asa platanoides, or Feldahorn trees, yeah, and KBE means Carpinus betulus, or Hainbuche. In a multivariate statistics, that's what we used here, they somehow clustered. We put all different types of microhabitat and their frequency in this multivariate analysis and see that they somehow form a cluster. And this Platanus acidifolia, which is basically originated in North America, they were not matching with that. So just to give you some tendency that there are lots of microhabitat indeed, but there is some sort of cluster formation based on the nativeness, which needs to be further studied. It's only one study, 3 cemeteries, so you need more verification on that. So then we have Zoe's master thesis, which was very, very interesting. She selected 4 species: horse chestnut, maple, black locust, winter linden, and she selected 80 per species distributed equally between park and street, 320 trees all over Karlsruhe. And she found that most of the case, except black locust trees, the trees which are in the park, they have higher amount of microhabitat richness. So that is also kind of makes sense, because in the park you have totally different management. But look, the size was same. The same size will bring you more microhabitat. So that has a high impact when you manage trees in the park, which should keep it as long as possible, right? And that is also very interesting to give you a kind of glimpse that I told you there are key types of microhabitat like cavities, rot holes, fungi, epiphytes, and nest. And then we distributed between street and park, between Acer platanoides, Asculus, Hippocastanium, and like 4 species. And you found that there are high variation in the provision. So it means also species matter. not all species. So some species has, very low wood density, or some has very high wood density, some are low, short, kind of fast growing, some are slow growing, and that has a lot of impact on microhabitat occurrence. So that was our stage of research 2 years ago, or 1.5 years ago, and that led to a second question, that who basically visit a tree? So who are living in the city? And for that, we got a very nice cooperation between Yale School of Environment, and we wanted to, so that's where New Haven in USA, in the Connecticut is located, and that's Karlsruhe, 48° north, almost like a Newfoundland. And New Haven is far south, the weather is completely different, right? And we took Norway maple, which is a native trees here, but invasive in USA, a very problematic species, and Quercus rubra, which is originating from USA and getting problematic here now already. And we try to see an enemy release hypothesis to check whether if you do a across the pond comparison, how it changes. And we kind of do a eDNA sampling, so we take out the leaves, for example, and like corona swab, the same procedure, the bark swab, yeah. And then we took the soil and made all the sample to a laboratory in Lisbon, who kind of extracted the DNA from the sample and used primers, like 4 different types of primers, to find which kind of species are there, yeah. And that was fascinating. We got 286 vertebrates and invertebrates sign, so signature, including human, of course, yes, and dogs and cats and all kind of animals in Karlsruhe, and New Haven 148. If you ask me why, I don't know. This is something that we would like to focus more. There are a lot of urbanist species, and there are also some sort of rare species, so we have to go more deeper. But what I wanted to show you here, look between Germany and USA, the community building was completely different. So same host species, in 2 continents, you have 2 different communities of animal. That makes a lot of sense, right? When a species become invasive or not, because then the interaction between a host species and other animals will be different if you have a different setting, and that's somehow satisfied the enemy release hypothesis. Then we talk about the soil fungi. We got 150 species of fungi in the soil in Karlsruhe, 3 times more than New Haven. And there is also a clear separation between the 2 continents or 2 cities. And there, fusarium is a very crazy fungi that create a heart rot in the trees. That's not good for the trees. So you got a lot of fusarium fungi in the Norway maples of Karlsruhe, but not in New Haven. Because in New Haven, Norway maple is exotic and invasive, and there must be a reason, right? Because maybe that can be one reason, that a traditional pathogen, which is used to be here, not again anymore available in United States. Yeah? And then took about tree fungi, and we also found more diversity in Karlsruhe and not in New Haven. And that fascinates me. If you look about biogeography, we are 10° north of New Haven. Theoretically, we should have less diversity and they should have more. But this is something I would really like to look data from other American cities in future to see whether this is a simple case issue or it's a general trend across the coast. Yeah. But we got 2 bad pathogenic fungi only in Karlsruhe samples of Norway maple, also not in New Haven. And that is also interesting very much for the American colleagues to know. Soil bacteria, we have not yet analyzed the data fully, but we got the same trend, nearly 300 species for New Haven, more, and less in Karlsruhe, but separating between 2 continents very clearly. So I was kind of bringing you through the kind of scanning biodiversity in the city trees, and now shifting to a different topic. But keep it in mind that the eDNA analysis we have done was only a scanning of one time. It is not a monitoring. It's just kind of observation. To monitor, you need some sort of camera or something, a longer period of time and regular inventory. We got only 24 trees, 72 sample cost 34,000 euro to run that primers. It's super expensive methodology, just developed after COVID. So this is something very, very new. Now I'd like to bring to a second topic, trees and human well-being, why people love trees in the city at all. And for that, concept came from Aaron Antonovsky, who survived the Holocaust, and he was interested to know how people can survive or lead a life even after a very dark phase of his life or her life, how that person can recover and still lead a life. And he came up with the idea called salutogenesis versus pathogenesis. So when COVID or any virus impact us, that's some sort of pathogen impact us, right? So we get sick and we try to treat with medicine. That's the way the medicine system is developed. Salutogenesis, on the other hand, is the inner strength of a human to kind of survive from a stress. And that is more complex, more psychological, more neurological, and many factors contribute that. So it's between a fight between death and total health. So sense of coherence, general resistance, resources are part of salutogenesis. This is a concept he developed after the war in 1970s. And if you look the psychiatry, psychology, and neuropsychology literature in Germany and also in the world, that's super accepted concept at the moment. So then the question is, we try to use trees as a salutogens in the city. So we have visual cues. When you see green landscape, you're working in the laptop computer and just move your head and look at tree, you will see the brain pulses really change. Yeah. Olfactory cues, good smells in gardens, auditory cues, bird song, sensory cues. So these are the factors that trees can provide, or it can also jeopardize. If you have a tree that creates a lot of allergy and have a bad smell, then can also negatively impact you, right? So we found in our project that person who had access to gardens with trees or could see large trees from balconies had less stress during COVID lockdown in Karlsruhe than persons who did not have such stress. Yeah? So to understand that, I try to make a link with salutogenesis. Yeah? And then you can ask me, okay, then, but what is the causality? The scientists always like to do an experiment and causality, whether it's just association or a causation. And that's the colleague from Heidelberg and KIT did. So they so what you see is dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, a part of brain, and dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, another part of the brain. And this is the area where you have high activity, which means that you got a high exchange of electrons between the neurons. Yeah. And that means you are under stress. So when you are driving on the Autobahn, then this will be more high, and it means you have high cortisol level in the blood. So if you measure if you do a EEG and cortisol measurement, then you can really see that. So what Heike Tost and her colleague did in Heidelberg and Mannheim, they try to kind of expose human to different degree of green space throughout the 7 days of the period. So all the participants are young people and all the participants are healthy. That was kind of norm they had fixed. And they had to be in the hospital every day and scan their brain under MRI or magnetic resonance imaging, functional magnetic resonance imaging. And they kind of created this graph. And the main message here is that when they are more exposed to green space, their activity decline. It means the cortisol level also decline. Yeah? So when we spend more time in the urban green space, activities in the prefrontal cortex decline, hence reducing aversive emotion processing. So irritation, anger, and sadness or depression, these then less. Yeah? So, and that research also motivated us to do a new experiment in Karlsruhe in a project called Future Biocity, where we try to link subjective well-being. What is a subjective well-being? So if subjective well-being is in a psychology, it's a way to ask a human that how you are feeling today, how was your situation in last 3 days, and these are World Health Organization provides some questionnaire, and based on the questionnaire and from the response from many people, like hundreds of people, you can calculate subjective well-being. So it's because well-being is very difficult to measure, therefore we call it subjective well-being. So Angela and colleagues, Johanna, they did a very interesting work. So first, they kind of scanned the biodiversity of the city. So we first did a lot of AI and algorithm to know which species, which trees is what species. So with that, we could kind of quantify a Shannon diversity index for every pixel of Karlsruhe, 100 by 99 by 99 meter. And then they kind of ask people with the Maptionnaire survey. So they got a questionnaire which can be geo-tracked and based on smartphone called Maptionnaire. And they kind of map. We ask people, where do you visit? And what is your subjective well-being in that area, or how you do assess the subjective well-being based on that? A priori, we did not tell them that we want to correlate green space with anything. So they had no knowledge. So we clearly follow the norm from World Health Organization for this. So the main message here is that computed biodiversity, this is the biodiversity we computed, modeled, actual, I call it, okay? 9 tree species we could identify with our algorithm, but the rest not, yeah? That had a correlation with perception of tree species diversity. So we ask people that if you go to Schloss Park, what is your perception about biodiversity in that area or tree species diversity in that area? Then we correlate with that perception with the actual tree species diversity in that area, and that has a correlation. And then perception of tree species diversity had a direct correlation with subjective well-being. However, subjective well-being and actual tree species diversity had not any correlation, or no negative, no nothing. And I know the reason, because we only quantify 9 species, right? And there are also many, we use the data from Gartenbaum, for example, but then we miss many trees which are not part of Gartenbaum, right? So that means if we have better modeling in future, and if we actually calculate the biodiversity, I think there was the beta or model estimate was positive, but it was not significant. I think that will be then change in future. That is for today's lecture. It is very important. Age and size of a tree, how big the tree is and how old the tree is. That has a positive impact on human perception of well-being. General species diversity, so overall birds, animals, all kind of animals, that also has a positive impact. Unkemptness or messiness of a green space. So if a green space is not properly managed, very messy, more close to nature, and that has a very, for me, and for our research group, that's a very important variable, because it changes between culture to culture, country to country. And in this part of the world, people would like to see the green space more tidy, more beautiful, more managed. That somehow, sometime contradict with biodiversity provision, by the way, but this is something, a very interesting field. Yeah. So now I bring to you the climate regulation part of the story. So kind of shifting you, bringing you from the human story that we are talking about. So this is the work from Zoe, where she compared different tree species and different type of regulating ecosystem service, like carbon sequestration, oxygen production, transpiration, pollution removal. Pollution here means the fine matter, so the fine particulate matters, and also potential evapotranspiration. So what I just want to tell you is that, look, in most of the case, there is a difference between park and street, and also between the species. But look about variable like pollution removal. So for example, the fine particulate matters and so on. A tree, as a platinoides in the park, can, for example, reduce 10 gram per year per meter square of CPA. CPA is a crown projection area. So if you stand under a tree and you kind of quantify that how much area is crown, so we divide it by that. And that, just to give you an idea that, and these are the large trees with more than 40 centimeter DVH, it is enormous. If you multiply this with all trees of Karlsruhe, that will be very high variable. And this is the ecosystem service our city, all manager really need to take care of, because that is something we are getting from the tree. So another very important variable is cooling during heat wave in Karlsruhe. So everybody is super interested about that, as Karlsruhe is unfortunately getting warmer and warmer. This was a part of a GrüneLunge project where we got a vehicle from Deutsche Wetterdienst, and we did multiple meteorological data collection at also the surface temperature and at the air temperature. Now you guys who are working on meteorology, you perhaps know that many of the all satellites at the moment in the world cannot quantify the air temperature. They can only quantify the surface temperature. But the air temperature has a huge impact on our physiologically equivalent temperature, right? And that's something we are interested to know, the correlation between surface temperature and air temperature, and try to model it, yeah? So we did that in the heat wave condition, clear sky, maximum temperature 30 degrees Celsius or more, and velocity of wind is 3 meter per second or less, yeah? So, and that was kind of thermal exposure during the air temperature in the evening 18 to 24 o'clock. This just gives you an idea how the data looks like. It gives you all the hotspots of area where you have very heat, yeah? By the way, this is not surface temperature. That is the novelty in this data. This is the air temperature modeled from generalized additive modeling. Based on that, we calculate the air temperature, yeah? So this was our, so how we did that, we had a route from center of the city to outskirt, and we kind of use a visiting salesman algorithm to find the overall temperature of the Karlsruhe based on that route, yeah? And this gives you an idea about the night, 22 to 4 o'clock. You see in the deep night, this temperature is pretty warm in the center of the city, much lower in the Dulak, and also in the area near the Hartwald, right? So then we use a kind of tree cover estimate for 100 meter both sides, a 200 meter width of this area, which was kind of spatially autocorrelation allowed us to do so, not beyond that. And that is the kind of interesting, I thought, we did a lot of research on that, but this is something I found interesting for today's lecture. Here you have tree cover density, a very interesting variable, so how much is covered in a neighborhood. And here is the air temperature, yeah? But you see here, this red line is in night, midnight to early morning, so when people are basically sleeping. And you see that if you go from an area with 10% or 0% cover of tree to area of 40% cover, you got a nearly 5 degrees Celsius decline in temperature during the heat wave in the night. And it's night temperature. Imagine, I mean, that's the time when everybody is sleeping. And that is super important also for Gartenbau and all for a health department, everybody to know this fact, yeah? So we got trade-offs and synergy. So for example, microhabitat provisions have trade-offs with regulating ecosystem service as quality of leaf area declined in old trees, right? If you have more moribund trees, date trees, large trees with poor leaf area, definitely it will have more biodiversity, right? But you also need a healthy leaf area, right? Because you want to provide all the ecosystem service, and there is a clear trade-off on that. And that is something we need to manage. What is the balance between that? However, climate regulations have synergies with trees of healthy and good leaf area, of course, because that brings, that sequestrate more carbon and so on. There must be a balance between large trees, medium and small size trees in different quartier of the city. So at the moment, in future, how you kind of implement this result to praxis. One option is when you plan a quartier or a neighborhood, how it should look like. There should be a proper balance between the different size of the tree, not a neighborhood with lot of trees, total leaf area good, but very small trees, yeah? But then you have less diversity in that area. So this is something we need to consider. And we have a lot of challenges at the moment. We have high dieback of trees due to drought and heat wave. Everybody know that. That creates our job very, we got a strict safety regulations in Germany. Germany, I will not start that topic, but you can look the law. Germany has one of the most strict regulation when it comes to tree safety. If you are injured by a tree, the person who owned the tree has to pay everything. And if something really bad happened, then you are in prison. And that has positive and negative effect, right? But at the moment, when we manage the trees, that's a very important thing we have to consider, okay? Lack of financial and human resources for maintenance, that's a huge problem. Gartenbauamt and all colleagues, they don't have much of human resources, and that's very, very important point. Conflict of tree growing space with infrastructure project. When you build a new tunnel, new road, everything, the first thing happens is that take the tree out. So tree as a green infrastructure, tree as a critical infrastructure, that can be part of your discussion. That is something we need, right? Lack of scientific knowledge also. You know, if you want to do research on a tree growing front of your house, it's not so fancy, right? People would like to do research far away from the city, in Amazon or in poles. But that's the point. We need a more knowledge for trees which is growing in front of your house. Otherwise, you cannot create evidence, right? And for all that, we need some sort of inter and multidisciplinary environment to work, a more under real-world framework. So, and that's all our project try to do. Take home is retain and preserve large trees as long as possible. Tune arboricultural practices, for example, pruning and crown shaping. This is something we and Gartenbaum should work together in the future, for example, like how we manage the trees in a way that has more microhabitat, high protection of large trees, diameter more than 40 centimeter in cemeteries and park. More research is needed to link biodiversity and ecosystem function. That's, for example, we know that having more biodiversity increase the resilience, having more biodiversity increase the productivity. But all this knowledge come from horticulture and forestry or agriculture, but not really from the city. So that is something we have to really consider. Urban ecology and urban planning is very complex discipline, and therefore all stakeholders, citizens should work together. I think this presentation I made is a result of GrüneLunge project, which was concluded in March, also result of Future BioCity project, and I'm also very thankful for some basic funding that we received from ITAS KIT for this project. And if you would like to know more about what we are doing, we got a URBORETUM project recently started. You can look our follow-up. We had a new project, Zukamas, which is an ICN project, so Integrated Campus for Sustainability, funded by Ministry of Baden-Württemberg, for example, starting very soon or already started until 2026. We got a new project called Urban Transformation, Urban Blue-Green Infrastructure. This is a project we win a prize from Helmholtz Sustainability Initiative, and that we will work together with Leipzig, with Umwelt Zentrum Leipzig, for example, and we will do a kind of sensor experiment in Karlsruhe and Leipzig. We have an award with the Susanne Kultur project, a small project, but that at least allow us to buy some sensor. In nowadays, finding money is very difficult anyway. And yeah, I think that's it. Do you still have some time, or I'm overshooting? Then I will. Okay, so I take 5 minutes then to give you some provocative idea. I mean, you can totally disagree with what I will show, but just to ignite, because this is a kind of brain bites, right? So your brain should be kind of beaten after my lecture. So this is my institute at the moment. Okay, you stand here, the Karlstrasse 11. This area, okay, this is the old Mint production house. So there where the money was printed in the past, yeah. It was designed by Weinbremer, so it's a structure somehow survived or maintained, yeah. I look how this place was 100 years ago, okay. That time this tree has a lot of Asserplatanoides and full of green space, okay. Not like that how, I counted number of trees on Karlstrasse from Karlstrasse, Ebertstrasse crossing until here Stefanienstrasse, and there are maximum 15 to 20 maybe you will find. It's in 2 kilometers of stretch, right? And the idea is that how, if we make something like that, yeah, that's crazy, right? So here the buildings are in Adobe Photoshop, so they are not exact digital twin of that. We could not made it, but all the features you see here, these are not fake or okay, they were kind of AI generated, but they are specific for species. And this was created by Lumion. So the idea is that what happens if you stop car in the Karlstrasse? That's Innenstadt or inner city. And then you can completely transform to a green space. You could increase the cooling capacity of the area by going to 40% of canopy cover. And many of these buildings will need less energy, but that will create a huge lot of problem for the below ground infrastructure, because the pipe system which runs here, they will not allow this structure to happen. And then you need to change that whole system, and that will increase the cost. So this transformation looks ecologically and architecturally beautiful, but this transformation to economically realize it, that's not possible. Or at least not possible with current state of finance and current state of the knowledge. But that's how I want to say that brain bite, right? So this is something what we need, but maybe we cannot deliver, yeah? But think about also Stefanplatz, which is just behind Europaplatz. Okay, that was a gray day, so don't blame me or my student who took the picture from that location. But look, this is an area which has a very high function. It's the area where you got a weekend market, and every time there is a market. Underground there is a park plots, right? So, and if you want to transform this area to such a crazy shape, and the architects and ecologists, when they work together, they can create some figure like that. My colleague Arturo, he said it that this is a potato shape. So you basically create a kind of structure little bit, maintain the height of trees not so much, so that they don't destroy the park plots down, and create a gravel area where water can percolate, and at the same time create some area where you could have markets still continue, and also you can use the area for biodiversity, insects, and even for educating children and students about plants. Yeah. I was thinking that, okay, maybe this is some possibility, not compared to my Karlstrasse, but at least something can be done. But think about this. I mean, Otto Dulenkopf Park, this park at the moment is heavily mowed. There are many reasons for mowing. Yeah, you should not blame the people who are mowing regularly. There are many reasons. There are many weeds, many insects, and the way we manage and our philosophy of management is also the reason why we're mowing it. But you can question it, that whether it is necessary or whether we should manage the area a little bit differently. And if we convert the area, okay, there is another function here. So the people actually, or some kids or youngsters, they actually play football sometime. Although I had a doubt that whether that is the very, very regular case. Okay, of course. But you could still have an area where you could leave some area for football playing and do less mowing, plant more trees, and kind of creating a Miyawaki's forest or Kleinwald or small forest where you do nothing and try to allow it. Remember, people did not like messiness, right? So this can create another problem, by the way. But again, as I said, that this is, I had a feeling that ecologically, financially, perhaps this can be done in a way, because you don't need to change a lot of ground, and also you, of course, need money. But again, this is, I try to see how a city could look like for future, right? Because we told that if you have more diversity, that increase the resilience and so on. And I think with that, I don't want to bother you anymore. So thank you very much for your listening. Yeah.
Thank you, Somidh, a lot for this inspiring talk, for
Thank
this
you.
inspiring brain bites. I'm glad to hear that you are collaborating with the Gartenbauamt, because maybe they have some ideas how to realize some. Okay. If you use the microphone, we can also hear it in the.
Actually, we have some contributions to ecological mowing. So we have some people in our office who are dealing with that topic in special areas, even within the city. So we are working on that topic, that's right. But concerning the last picture with a pond or with a lake-like structure, we would have problems because we have a lot of soil pollution in that area. So I know that many people would love to have a lake there, but the water is polluted and also the ground. So that's a vision of you, but not realistic to us. I would have another interesting point for you, maybe. I studied landscape architecture, and we had the topic landscape aesthetics. And I think there are lots of assessments concerning visual landscape. And what we found out, even in Hanover, where I studied, is that there are a lot of differentiations, even within Germany, between northern Germans and southern Germans, while in southern Germany, the preference is indeed for the pastoral cultural landscape with hills and open and closed areas. while in the north, where people prefer an open view, they have a different attitude to the visual landscape. So I think it's really so differentiated that you can't say that people everywhere prefer this kind of landscape.
Yeah.
So you always have to make local studies if you want to find out, and that makes it very difficult to make assessments.
Yeah. Yeah,
of
thank you
course,
very
there
much.
are tendencies, and there are a lot of studies that the pastoral landscape is the overall thing which most people prefer from England to Germany. I don't know what Italians think about it. I think they have a different attitude. So
Yeah.
it's
I think
not easy.
you're Miss Ursula Nothelfer, right? Yeah, so she's from Gartenbauamt, so she also works together with Mario. So I totally agree with the fact that the design, like I said, that this is a perfect for a brain bite, right? I mean, look, this was created, this graphics was created at an emergency basis because some politicians in Stuttgart, they invited us in for a Landtag Grünfraktion meeting, and they say, you transform all your GrüneLunge results in 6 minutes. And they say, okay, we paint it then something, right? And then I talked with the landscape architect Arturo. But that's the fascinating point, right? So it means you cannot achieve everything, right? So if you have a wishful thinking, so sometimes we are the scientists, we are very utopian, and we are happen to be utopian. We are taught to be utopian. We are taught to be think beyond boundary. But that not works sometimes, right? Then you need to really become more practical, yeah. And that is the most fascinating part to work in the GrüneLunge project, for example, when you have praxis and science working together. And we're designing something and we see, look, this is the problem and this is the side that we can have this thing and not. For example, it's really interesting to me now, not only in Karlsruhe, in Freiburg, also in many other cities, the mowing, like more close to nature mowing or less mowing and increasing the biodiversity is becoming interesting, I think. And regarding our application of the results, I can tell you, these results are very Karlsruhe specific, or maybe specific to this part of Germany, say Freiburg, Karlsruhe, Offenburg, this area. Of course, in the national scale, in different area, and I think in future, if we have some sort of project where you got whole country with different, that would be fascinating, yeah? Yeah.
Thanks, Somidh, for your kind of awesome brain bite. I have a question about dual land use, or kind of just land becomes more and more valuable. And so I was wondering whether you showed oak trees and linden trees and all, like would an apple tree or a fig tree have similar effects?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think the apple trees and fig trees and all the fruit trees, yeah, people who are doing the backyard gardening, they love them. They try to plant them, definitely. The issue whether you can consume them or eat them, the urban consumer thinking, it has some, for example, in Netherlands, people don't eat it because they think that the fruits are contaminated by many pollutants. But in France and in US, for example, there is a different view for that. Yeah. So again, it's but how that so having more fruit trees increases another ecosystem service, so food provision. And also the beauty, because they have beautiful flowers and so on. But you cannot or you may not able to plant fruit trees on the street because of safety and car. And in Germany there is a very specific regulation about size of the seed and how they hit the car and so on. So but for the backyard garden and for park, that could be a solution, but that can create a problem, because if people are not consuming the food, then it takes a lot of time in autumn to clear that, and creates a new challenges, right? So one problem I didn't talk about in Karlstrasse, for example, I told that you increase the tree species diversity. Increase the tree species diversity will reduce the vulnerability, but different tree has a different time of shedding the leaf. So it means the people from Gartenbauamt or any department, they need to visit the area multiple times. So you always have a cost. So far in GrüneLunge and URBORETUM project, all what we are talking about, how to transform that to economic benefit in an economic planning, that is something we are missing. So this would be my future goal from KIT, a economic professor or anybody to contact with economics, because this is something maybe we'll do in UTU-BGI project with Rebecca Folk and colleagues, who can basically say, okay, you have these options, and then you run simulation, and this is how the cost changes, yeah? Then we can give a better prognosis. But even the cost, in my opinion, it's a lot of infrastructure. So the vacuum cleaner, the driven vacuum cleaner which comes, you cannot function that machine on a surface which is heterogeneous. It has to be a homogeneous surface. So the way we basically clean our city, it has to be correlated with that. So therefore I say it's not easy. Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, South Europe, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, for example, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So for the online audience, I repeat the question. So the question is that species like Celtis australis and Celtis occidentalis. Celtis australis come from South Europe. Zurgelbaum, right, in Deutsch, yeah. And Celtis occidentalis come from North America. So the question from audience is that whether we know how two exotic, right? So both are exotic, come from South Asia, South Europe, another from North America. How biodiversity vary? It's a fantastic question. We have not investigated on that. So far, we only Quercus robur and Quercus rubra. So far, only we investigated. But this is exactly the questions we need to investigate, perhaps partly in URBORETUM project or in other project. So, for example, now you know that in Europe there is a strong push that we should bring some flora also from southern Europe, which are more drought tolerant, but then how that influence the local biodiversity in compare to the flora from North Asia or from East Asia, for example. But that's need more research. Next year we will have a new postdoc in our group. She will join to specifically study urban wildlife. And she will put sensors in the Karlsruhe to watch which animals and birds are visiting trees and how that vary. So I think in next 2-3 years we will have more knowledge on this aspect. Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I repeat for the audience, so the question is whether the species like Gleditschia triacanthus, this is a honeysuckle tree coming from Tennessee, it's in southeast USA, but honeysuckle tree has a relative in Karlsruhe also, is black locust or Robinia pseudoacacia. The question is whether honeysuckle trees are extremely drought tolerant. They can survive, they have very high drought tolerance, but her question is what is the biodiversity value? But that's exactly the question that we will research in the future. The trees which we call Klimabäume or climate adapted trees, what is the biodiversity potential of that tree? And that's why at one point I told that there are many assumptions but not evidence. So this is something, evidence creation takes time, but this is an interesting point. Yeah.
Thank you very much for all these explanations. I would like to cut it here, but Somidh is still here, so you can approach him and talk to him afterwards. Mm-hmm. I'm very happy to hear that you still have many questions to be answered and that you keep on working on it. Yeah. And maybe you come in another couple of years and give us new results.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Mm-hmm.